The next morning, Danny sat on the edge of his bed in the guest quarters and stared at the wall. The wall was made of pale crystal that glowed faintly from within, and it was very beautiful, but Danny was not looking at it. He was looking through it, replaying the moment in the Great Hall over and over again in his mind, like a broken recording. Commander Hayward had spent 2 hours the previous night telling him exactly how badly he had messed up. She had used words like catastrophic and career-ending and international incident, except worse because it is interplanetary. She had told him to stay in his room, keep his mouth shut, and let the real diplomats try to clean up his mess. Dr. Greer had been kinder but not more comforting. She explained that what Caliph had said, "Now stay, human," was not just a casual response. In the old Velhari language, it was a phrase called the Sovereign All, a declaration of personal interest with roots going back over 300 cycles. It had not been spoken publicly in living memory. It was intimate, binding in the eyes of Velhari tradition, and absolutely not the kind of thing a royal daughter was supposed to say to an alien stranger who had just accidentally called her gorgeous in front of the entire court. Nate Bishop, who handled stress with humor the way other people handled it with alcohol, had knocked on Danny's door at midnight and said, "So you proposed to an alien princess. How was your Tuesday?" Danny had not laughed. The Velhari Council was in an uproar. Danny could not hear the debates from the guest quarters, but Dr. Greer had access to the diplomatic communication channels, and she reported what she could. The council was split. One faction, led by several older members who studied the ancient texts, believed that Caliph's words held real power, regardless of the circumstances. They pointed to an old Velhari prophecy that spoke of a voice from beyond the veil that would speak without masks and shake the foundation of Velhari silence. They believed Danny might be connected to this prophecy. The other faction thought this was nonsense. They argued that Caliph had been impulsive and foolish, that the human had simply made a language error, and that the whole thing should be dismissed and forgotten before it became an embarrassment to the royal family. Commander Hayward wanted Danny to issue a formal apology. She drafted a statement that morning, carefully worded, to express regret for the misunderstanding while respecting Velhari customs. But when she showed it to Dr. Greer, the linguist shook her head. "You cannot do that," Dr. Greer said. "If Danny retracts his words publicly, he is saying that what he said was a lie. In Velhari culture, that is worse than the original offense. It means his words had no truth behind them. It means he was speaking without soul." "He was speaking without a working earpiece," Hayward said flatly. "The Velhari will not see it that way." Hayward rubbed her temples. "Then what do we do?" Dr. Greer did not have an answer. On the second night, Danny was alone in the guest quarters common room, sitting in a chair that was too tall for him, and drinking water from a crystal cup that made everything taste slightly sweet. Nate was running a security sweep of the building. Hayward was in a communication session with Earth. Dr. Greer was asleep. The palace was quiet, in a way that felt intentional, as if silence was something the Velhari had built into the architecture. Then the door opened, and Caliph walked in. She was accompanied by a single attendant, a young Velhari female who stood by the door and said nothing. Caliph herself moved into the room with the same calm, steady grace Danny had seen in the Great Hall. She wore a simpler garment now, dark gray with thin violet lines at the edges that matched the glow along her skin. Her bioluminescent markings were dim, controlled, but not entirely hidden. Danny stood up so fast he almost knocked the crystal cup off the table. "You should sit," Caliph said. Her English was clear and careful, with a slight musical quality that made every word sound like it had been chosen from a long list of options. "I did not come here to make you uncomfortable." Too late, Danny said, and then immediately wished he could take it back. But Kalith tilted her head, and something shifted in her expression. It was not a smile, not exactly, because Velhari did not smile the way humans did. It was more like a softening, a loosening of the careful mask she wore. "You are very honest," she said. "That is why I am here." She sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. It was something else, a shared pause, as if both of them were trying to figure out where to begin. Kalith spoke first. "I need you to understand something about my people. We feel deeply, more deeply perhaps than you realize. But we have been taught for generations that to show what we feel is dangerous. Emotion in public is seen as weakness. It is used against you by rivals, by political enemies, by anyone who wants power over you. We bury everything under silence and formality and control. And after enough time, some of us forget that the feelings are still there at all." She paused. The violet glow along her cheekbones flickered slightly. "My people have a sense that yours do not. We can feel the emotional truth behind spoken words. Not the meaning, but the feeling. When someone speaks to us, we sense whether their words carry honesty or deception, warmth or coldness, fear or courage. It is not mind reading. It is more like hearing a second voice beneath the first." Danny swallowed. "And when I said what I said?" "Your words carried no deception," Kalith said. "No political motive, no calculation. You did not know what you were saying, and because of that, there was no mask on your words. They were raw and true. Among my people, that kind of honesty is almost unheard of. Everyone speaks with layers. Everyone calculates. But you were simply saying what you felt, even though you did not mean to say it." Danny felt his face grow warm. "I really was just trying to say the greeting." "I know, but the feeling underneath was real. I felt it." The room was very quiet. "Why did you say what you said?" Danny asked. "The Sovereign Owl. Dr. Greer told me what it means. Why would you say something like that to a human you just met?" Kalith was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, more careful. "Because I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who feel nothing they are willing to show. I have been courted by military commanders and council members who speak perfect words with empty hearts. I have been told since I was a child that my duty is to bond with someone who will strengthen our family's political position. No one has ever spoken to me with genuine feeling. And then you stood there, a strange small creature from a strange loud world. And you looked at me, and your words carried warmth like sunlight." She paused. "I spoke the Sovereign All because for the first time in my life, I felt something honest directed at me, and I did not want it to leave." Danny did not know what to say. He was a communications officer. He fixed signal relays. He was not equipped for this. But he looked at Kalith, and he saw something in her violet eyes that he recognized. Loneliness. The kind that came not from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who never let you see who they really were. "I do not know how any of this works," Danny said. "I do not know your customs or your politics or what I am supposed to do next. But if you want to talk, just talk, not as a diplomat and a princess, but as two people, then I am here." Kalith's bioluminescent lines brightened just slightly. "I would like that." They talked about small things at first. Danny told her about Earth, about the ocean, about how it felt to stand on a beach and watch waves come in one after another, endless and patient. Kalith told him about the crystal forests of Aethara, how they hummed different notes depending on the wind, and how she used to sneak out of the palace as a child to listen to them sing. They talked about food, and Danny made her laugh, or something close to it, when he described the concept of pizza. They talked about music, and Kalith admitted that she had secretly listened to human radio transmissions that reached Velhari space, and that she found human music confusing and beautiful in equal measure. They talked until the pale light filtering through the crystal walls shifted from silver to gold, signaling the Atharan dawn. But not everything was peaceful. During the third day, Dr. Greer picked up concerning intelligence through the diplomatic channels. A Velhari military commander named Dorath Kale had begun pushing the council to reject the human delegation entirely. Dorath was a powerful figure, tall even by Velhari standards, with bioluminescent markings that burned a cold white. He had held a position of influence for decades, and it was well known among the court that he had long sought a political bond with Caliph to strengthen his control over the military council. Danny's arrival and Caliph's public declaration had ruined those plans. On the fourth night, Nate Bishop pulled Danny aside and told him something troubling. "I have been running security sweeps every evening," Nate said, squeezing his rubber ball in one hand. "Someone is watching us. There are surveillance devices in the walls of our quarters. They were not there when we arrived. Someone put them there in the last 2 days." "Dorith?" "That is my guess." That same night, Caliph took Danny to a place she had never shown anyone outside her family. It was a hidden grove at the edge of the palace grounds, where the crystal trees grew wild and untrimmed. The crystals here were older than the city, and they glowed with a soft, shifting light that changed color every few seconds, blue to green to pale gold. The air was warm and still, and the hum of the crystals was so low and deep that Danny felt it in his chest more than heard it with his ears. "I come here when I need to feel without being watched," Kayla said. She stood among the glowing trees with her arms at her sides, and for the first time she let her bioluminescent markings glow freely. The violet light spread across her skin in patterns that moved like slow fire. She looked at Danny with an openness that he understood was an act of trust deeper than any words could carry. "Among my people," she said quietly, "showing someone your private place is like showing them your soul." Danny looked at the crystal grove, at the shifting colors, at the woman standing in the middle of it all, glowing like a star that had decided to be still for a while. "It is beautiful," he said, and this time he meant to say it. The trial of intent was announced on the 7th day. Danny was sitting with Dr. Greer in the guest quarters, going over Velhari grammar notes, when Commander Hayward walked in, with a look on her face that made both of them stop talking. She held a thin crystal tablet in her hand, the kind the Velhari used for formal documents. "Dorath Kale has filed a challenge with the High Council," Hayward said. She set the tablet on the table. "He is invoking something called the Trial of Intent. Dr. Greer, please tell me this is not as bad as I think it is." Dr. Greer picked up the tablet and read it. Her face went pale. "It is worse. The Trial of Intent was an ancient Velhari legal mechanism. When a sovereign owl was spoken, and its sincerity was disputed, the person who had inspired the declaration could be brought before the council for a public examination. Velhari empaths, individuals trained from birth to sense the emotional truth beneath spoken words, would probe the subject's feelings, memories, and intentions. If the empaths found that the person was sincere, the sovereign owl would stand. If they found deception, manipulation, or emotional emptiness, the declaration would be annulled, and the one who spoke it would be publicly disgraced. In this case, that meant Danny would be probed, and if he failed, Caliph would be humiliated before her entire civilization. Commander Hayward's reaction was immediate. "We are leaving. I am pulling the team out tonight. This is an internal Velhari matter, and I will not risk a diplomatic officer in an alien legal proceeding that we do not fully understand." "If we leave, the alliance talks are over," Dr. Greer said. "The alliance talks are already over. This situation is out of control." Danny had been sitting quietly through this exchange. He looked up. "I am not leaving." Hayward turned to him. "Excuse me? If I run, It proves everything they think about humans, that we say things we do not mean, that we are cowards who make a mess and then disappear. And it will destroy Caliph. She put herself out there in front of her entire world because she believed what she felt from me was real. If I leave, I am telling her it was not. Danny, you are not a diplomat. You are a communications officer who had a broken earpiece. I know what I am, but I also know what is right. Hayward stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Nate Bishop, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He is right, Commander, Nate said. If we run from this, we lose more than an alliance. We lose face with every species watching. Hayward closed her eyes. If this goes wrong, it is on all of us. She opened her eyes and pointed at Dr. Greer. Prepare him. Teach him everything you can. Greer spent the next 3 days preparing Danny for what was coming. She explained that the empathic probing would not be gentle. The Velhari empaths were trained to reach past surface emotions and dig into the deeper layers of a person's feelings. They would sense fear, doubt, desire, shame, and everything else Danny carried inside him. There was no way to fake sincerity. There was no way to hide. You need to understand, Dr. Greer told him on the night before the trial. No human has ever undergone this. We do not know how it will feel. It could be painful. It could be overwhelming. The Velhari emotional landscape is different from ours. Their empaths are used to reading Velhari minds, which are structured and controlled. Human emotions are messier, louder. There is a chance they will not know what to make of you. That makes 2 of us, Danny said. The trial was held on the 10th day. The great hall was filled to its highest balconies. Every seat was taken. Velhari citizens who could not fit inside watched through crystal screens in the palace courtyard. This was the most significant public event in decades, and everyone knew it. Danny walked into the hall alone. That was the rule. The subject of the trial could have no support, no advocates, no translators. He stood in the center of a raised crystalline platform that glowed faintly beneath his feet. The platform was warm. He could feel it through his boots, a gentle heat that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. 3 Velhari empaths stood around the platform in a triangle. They were older, 2 men and 1 woman, and their bioluminescent markings glowed a steady, neutral blue. The woman, whose name was Serath, was the lead empath. She was the oldest Velhari Danny had ever seen. Her silver skin had a weathered quality, like stone that had been smoothed by centuries of water. Her eyes were pale, almost white, but they were sharp and clear. Dorath Kale stood to one side of the hall, tall and rigid, his white glowing markings bright with barely contained satisfaction. He believed this trial would end with Danny exposed as an empty, careless alien, and Calith's reckless words would be erased from the record. Calith was on the royal balcony above, next to her father. Danny glanced up at her once. She was still, composed, but the violet glow along her skin was brighter than he had ever seen it. She was afraid. Not for herself, for him. Serath spoke. Her voice was low and carried through the entire hall, without effort. Human, you stand before the Council of Aethara to answer the question of intent. The Sovereign All was spoken in your name. Do you understand what is asked of you? I do, Danny said. Then open yourself. We will find the truth. The 3 empaths raised their hands, and Danny felt it begin. It started as pressure. Not physical pressure, more like the feeling of being watched by 1,000 eyes at once, except the watching was happening inside his own chest. He felt the empaths move through his surface emotions first, the nervousness, the fear, the slight absurdity of standing on an alien planet, being emotionally examined by people he had met 10 days ago. Then they went deeper. They found his childhood, the small apartment in Ohio where he grew up, his mother's voice calling him for dinner, the feeling of fixing his first radio at age 12, the satisfaction of making something broken work again. They found his loneliness, The quiet kind that sat in the background of his life, like a low hum. The kind that came from always being the guy who was good with machines, but never quite knew what to say to people. They found his fear of failure. His worry that he was not good enough for this mission, not smart enough, not polished enough. They found his embarrassment about the mistranslation, and beneath it, they found something he had not fully admitted to himself. They found that when he had looked at Caliph in the Great Hall, before his mouth had betrayed him, he had felt something genuine. Not love, it was too early for that, but a spark of real admiration. She had walked toward him, and he had thought, without words, without planning, that she was the most striking person he had ever seen. The mistranslation had not created a false feeling. It had accidentally given voice to a true one. The empaths found this truth, and they lingered on it. Danny felt them turning it over, examining it from every angle, testing it for cracks. He stood on the platform with his eyes closed and his hands at his sides, and he felt more exposed than he had ever felt in his life. Every wall he had ever built around his feelings was gone. He was standing naked in front of a civilization that could see everything. And then the empaths found something else. They found his choice to stay. They found the moment in his guest room when Hayward had told him to leave, and he had refused. They felt the reason behind that refusal. It was not bravery, not really. It was something simpler. Danny had stayed because walking away from Caliph after she had shown him her truth felt like the cruelest thing he could do. He stayed because he could not live with himself if he did not. The empaths pulled back. The pressure lifted. Danny opened his eyes and realized he was breathing hard, as if he had been running. The hall was silent. Serath stood very still. Her pale eyes were wide, wider than Danny had seen on any Velhari. The two other empaths looked at her, waiting. The entire hall looked at her, waiting. She turned to face the council, and she spoke one sentence. "His heart speaks the old language." The reaction was immediate. A wave of sound moved through the hall, not shouting, because Velhari did not shout, but a collective intake of breath, a murmur that rippled through hundreds of voices at once. The phrase Serath had used was from the ancient texts, the same texts that spoke of the voice from beyond the veil. She had just declared, in front of the entire civilization, that Danny Cole's emotional truth matched the sincerity described in their oldest prophecies. Dorath Kale's face changed. The cold satisfaction vanished, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. He stared at Danny with eyes that burned, and then he turned and walked out of the hall without a word. On the balcony above, Caliph's composure finally broke. The violet glow that had been building along her skin spread outward in a wave of light that was visible from every corner of the great hall. In Velhari terms, it was the most public display of emotion anyone had witnessed from a member of the royal family in generations. She was glowing so brightly that the humans in the room could see the light reflected on the crystal walls. She was not ashamed. She was relieved. She was grateful. And beneath all of that, she was looking at Danny with something that did not need translation. The High Sovereign sat beside his daughter on the royal balcony. He had watched everything without expression. Now he rose slowly to his feet, and the hall fell silent again. He looked down at Danny, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "You have proven your sincerity, human. Your heart is not in question. But one honest heart does not speak for an entire species. If you wish this bond to stand, if you wish your people to earn the trust of the Velhari, you must show me that humanity as a whole carries the truth that my empaths found in you. One man's honesty is not enough. Prove that your kind is worthy of what my daughter has offered." He paused. "You have 30 days. Then the High Sovereign turned and left the hall, and Caliph followed, glancing back at Danny one last time before she disappeared through the crystal archway. Danny stood alone on the platform. The hall emptied slowly around him. Nate Bishop was the first to reach him. He put a hand on Danny's shoulder and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "So, 30 days to prove humanity is good. No pressure." Danny let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "No pressure at all." Danny spent the first night after the trial, sitting on the floor of his room, thinking. Commander Hayward had already begun drafting a plan. She wanted to bring in Earth's best ambassadors, polished speakers with perfect records who could deliver rehearsed speeches about human values and cooperation. Dr. Greer suggested a team of scientists who could demonstrate humanity's intellectual contributions to the galaxy. Nate Bishop suggested sending a Marine unit to show discipline and strength. Danny turned them all down. "That is not what the High Sovereign asked for," he said. "He did not ask me to prove that humans are smart, or strong, or well-spoken. He asked me to prove that humanity is honest. If we send people trained to perform, the empaths will see through them in seconds. We need people who do not know how to pretend. You want to bring civilians to an alien homeworld in the middle of a political crisis. I want to bring real people." Danny sent a message to Earth through the long-range quantum relay. He explained the situation as simply as he could. He was not asking for heroes. He was asking for ordinary people who were willing to be themselves in front of an alien civilization that could sense every lie. The United Earth Coalition, desperate for the Velhari Alliance because of growing threats from the expansionist Draven Collective, approved the request within 12 hours. 2 weeks later, a small transport ship arrived at Aethara, carrying 12 human civilians. Chris Dunn was a school teacher from a small town in Montana. He was in his early 30s, wore glasses that were slightly too big for his face, and had a way of talking to everyone, adults and children alike, as if they were the most interesting person in the room. George Pratt was a retired firefighter from Virginia. He was 62 years old, broad in the shoulders, quiet in the way that men become quiet when they have seen enough of the world to know that most things do not need words. He had lost his wife, Helen, 2 years earlier, and the grief lived in his eyes even when he smiled. Katie Marsh was a nurse from a hospital in Denver. She was 28, sharp and quick, with a laugh that came easily, and a steady hand that never shook, not even when she was scared. Sam Ortiz was a musician from Austin. He played guitar, wrote songs nobody had heard, and had a voice that could make a room full of strangers go quiet. The others included a mechanic named Pete Harper, who could fix anything with moving parts, a grandmother named Carol Lynn, who had raised 5 children and did not take nonsense from anyone, a college student named Jake Rivers, who was studying marine biology and had never been further than Florida, and 4 others who were just as unremarkable and just as real. The Velhari watched them arrive with open suspicion. These were not diplomats. These were not soldiers. They were soft, unpolished, and visibly nervous. Several council members openly questioned the wisdom of this approach. Dorath Kale, who had been quiet since the trial, was seen on the council balcony with a thin, cold smile on his face. He clearly expected this plan to fail. But then the days began to pass, and something unexpected started to happen. Chris Dunn was assigned to observe a Velhari educational center. Within 2 days he was sitting on the floor with Velhari children, teaching them a simple clapping game from Earth. The children were hesitant at first, their small bioluminescent markings flickering with uncertainty. But Chris was patient and warm, and did not mind when they got the rhythm wrong. He clapped along with them and laughed when he messed up himself. By the 3rd day, the children were running to greet him when he arrived. Their parents, watching from the edges of the room, did not know what to make of this strange human, who seemed to find genuine joy in the laughter of alien children. George Pratt was taken to meet a group of Velhari elders who served as community counselors. He was not expected to do anything, just observe. But, on the second day, one of the elders, a very old Velhari male named Torvan, asked George about the sadness he could feel beneath his calm surface. George, who was not a man of many words, sat down across from Torvan and told him about Helen. He talked about how she used to hum while she cooked. He talked about the morning he woke up and reached for her side of the bed and found it empty and cold, and how some part of him still reached for her every morning, even though she had been gone for 2 years. Torvan listened, and then he spoke. He told George that he had lost his own bondmate, a woman named Irath, 50 cycles ago. He said that in Velhari culture, grief was meant to be processed silently and privately, and that he had never spoken of Irath's death to anyone. Then Torvan did something that shocked the other elders in the room. He wept. Softly, quietly, with thin trails of bioluminescent light running down his face like glowing tears. He wept for the first time in 50 cycles, because a human firefighter from Virginia had shown him that grief was not something to hide from. Katie Marsh worked alongside the Velhari healers in their medical center. The Velhari had advanced technology, far beyond human medicine in many ways. But Katie did not approach them as a student trying to learn from superiors. She approached them as a colleague. She showed them simple human techniques, things like how to calm a frightened patient with a gentle touch and quiet voice. And she asked them to show her their methods in return. She did not pretend to understand everything. She asked questions openly, admitted when she was confused, and reacted to their technology with genuine wonder. The Velhari healers, used to guarded and formal interactions with outsiders, did not know how to respond to someone who was so openly impressed by their work. On the 5th evening, Sam took his guitar to the crystal grove at the edge of the palace grounds. He sat on a fallen crystal trunk, tuned the strings, and started playing. He did not play for an audience. He played because he always played when he was in a new place, and did not know what else to do. The sound of the guitar moved through the crystal trees and mixed with their natural hum, creating something that no one on Aethara had ever heard before. Velhari citizens began to gather. They came one by one, drawn by the sound, and they stood among the crystal trees and listened. Sam played for an hour, old folk songs and simple melodies, and when he finished, the grove was full of Velhari, who stood in silence, with their bioluminescent markings glowing in soft, shifting colors. He played again the next evening, and each time, more came. The Velhari empaths, who had been assigned to monitor every interaction between the humans and the Velhari people, reported their findings to the council each day. The reports were consistent. The human civilians carried the same quality the empaths had found in Danny: imperfect, unpolished, sometimes confused, but fundamentally honest. They were not performing. They were simply being who they were. Slowly, the public mood began to shift. Velhari citizens who had never interacted with an alien species started approaching the humans with questions. A young Velhari woman asked Katie Marsh why humans touched each other so often, and Katie explained that for humans, touch was comfort, and the woman nodded as if she had learned something she had always suspected but never been allowed to say. Kaylit watched all of this from a distance. She and Danny still met in the evenings, their conversations growing longer and more honest as the days passed. She told him that she had given up hope that her people would ever allow themselves to feel openly again. Centuries of emotional suppression had turned the Velhari into a civilization that functioned perfectly on the surface, but was slowly dying underneath. She said Danny's accident in the Great Hall might have been the crack they needed, the first break in a wall that had been standing for too long. "You did not just speak to me that day," she told him. "You spoke to all of us. We just did not know how to listen." But while the human civilians were building bridges, Dorath Kale was building something else. On the 20th day, Nate Bishop intercepted a coded transmission, leaving the palace through an unauthorized channel. He spent 2 days breaking the encryption, and when he finally decoded it, his face went gray. Dorath Kale had been communicating with the Draven Collective, the aggressive alien empire that had been expanding its territory toward Velhari space for years. He had offered them intelligence on Velhari defense positions, shield frequencies, and patrol schedules. In exchange, the Draven would send a fleet to Aethara. Dorath's plan was simple. The attack would throw the Velhari into chaos. He would blame the humans for weakening Aethara's defenses through distraction, and in the confusion, he would seize power from the High Sovereign. Nate brought the decoded transmission to Commander Hayward. She read it twice, and then she put it down and looked at her team. "He has already sent the information," Hayward said. "The Draven fleet is probably already on its way." "How long do we have?" Danny asked. "Days, maybe less." Danny looked out the window at the Crystal Grove, where Sam Ortiz was playing guitar and a crowd of Velhari was listening in the fading light. He looked at the world that was just beginning to open up, the walls that were just starting to crack, the trust that was just starting to grow. "Then we do not have enough time to run," Danny said. "We need to warn them." But before they could move, the palace lights flickered, and the faint hum of the crystal walls shifted to a deeper, more unsettling frequency. Nate checked his instruments, and his face went tight. "The palace defense grid just went offline," he said. "Someone shut it down from inside." In the distance, beyond the crystal forests, the sky above Aethara began to glow with the light of ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. The Draven had arrived. The Draven fleet came in fast and hard. 12 heavy cruisers and 1 carrier, all dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a tight formation above the northern hemisphere of Aethara. Their hulls were dark, angular, and built for one purpose. Within minutes, they had established an orbital blockade and began scanning the surface for targets. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. The Velhari defense grid was dead, shut down from within by Dorath Kale's agents. The Velhari defense fleet, a force of fast interceptors and 2 capital ships, was scattered across the system on routine patrol. By the time they received the recall signal, the Draven would have hours of uncontested control over Aetharan space. The High Council gathered in the Great Hall in a state of near panic. Velhari officials, normally so composed and controlled, were talking over each other, their bioluminescent markings flashing in sharp, erratic patterns of white and red, colors Danny had never seen from them before, colors of fear. Then Dorath Kale walked into the Great Hall. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. His white bioluminescent markings glowed with cold, steady light. He stopped in the center of the floor and addressed the council. His voice was calm and clear. "The humans brought this on us," he said. "Their presence distracted us. Their emotions infected us. While we were listening to guitar music and weeping with aliens, our defenses were neglected. I warned the council this would happen. Now I am offering a solution. Surrender leadership to me. I have negotiated terms with the Draven Collective. They do not want Aethara destroyed. They want a partnership, one built on strength, not sentiment. Remove the High Sovereign. Send the humans away, and the Draven will withdraw." Silence filled the hall. Half the council, paralyzed by fear, seemed to be considering it. Danny was standing at the edge of the hall with his team. Commander Hayward was already calculating escape routes. Nate Bishop had his hand on his sidearm. Dr. Greer was pale but steady. The 12 human civilians were gathered near the back of the hall, frightened and confused. Danny looked at Hayward. "I need to speak." Hayward shook her head. "Danny, this is not the time. This is exactly the time. He did not wait for permission. He walked forward, past the Velhari officials, past Dorath Kale, and he stepped onto the same crystalline platform where he had stood during the trial of intent. His boots were the only sound in the hall. Every Velhari in the room turned to look at him. Dorath Kale's eyes narrowed with contempt. Danny did not give a grand speech. He was not built for grand speeches. He spoke simply, the way he always did, as if he were talking to one person instead of 1,000. I know what fear feels like, he said. Every human does. We are afraid of dying. We are afraid of losing the people we love. We are afraid of being weak, of being wrong, of trusting someone and having that trust broken. Fear is something we carry with us every day of our lives. He paused and looked around the hall. Where I come from, humans spent centuries hurting each other because of that fear. We built weapons. We built walls. We told ourselves that strength meant being harder and colder than the person standing across from us. And it almost destroyed us. It took us a very long time to learn that the bravest thing a person can do is not pick up a weapon. The bravest thing a person can do is extend a hand to someone they are afraid of and say, I trust you. He looked directly at Dorath Kale. You think emotions make you weak. You think shutting everything out and making deals with enemies is strength. But that is not strength. That is fear wearing a mask. And I think you know that. Dorath Kale said nothing. His jaw tightened. Danny turned back to the council. We are not warriors. We are not politicians. Most of us are just ordinary people who came here because we were asked to be honest. And right now, I am being honest. You have a choice to make. Not between humans and the Draven. Between fear and trust. We cannot make that choice for you. But whatever you decide, we are staying. He looked at Commander Hayward. And, after a long moment, she gave a single nod. Commander, Danny said, signal the Karina. What the Velhari did not know, and what Dorath Kale had failed to discover, was that the Starpoint Karina was not an ordinary exploration vessel. Before the mission, Earth's Coalition Command had quietly installed a classified electronic warfare suite aboard the ship. It was designed to disrupt fleet-wide communications, targeting systems, and navigation arrays. Hayward had kept this capability hidden, even from the Velhari, as a worst-case precaution. She had prayed she would never need it. She sent the signal. In orbit, the Karina powered up systems that had been dormant since the ship left Earth. The warfare suite activated and sent a massive wave of electromagnetic interference across the Draven fleet's communication bands. The effect was immediate. The 12 Draven cruisers lost contact with each other. Their targeting systems went blind. Their tight formations scattered as individual ships, suddenly unable to coordinate, began drifting out of position. It was not a weapon. It would not destroy anything. And it would not last forever. An hour at most before the Draven adjusted their frequencies. But it bought time. Danny turned to the High Sovereign, who had been sitting on his throne throughout the entire exchange, his face unreadable. We just gave you time, Danny said. What you do with it is your decision. The High Sovereign looked at Danny for a long moment. Then he looked at Kalith, who stood beside the throne, with her violet markings blazing so brightly that the light cast shadows on the crystal walls. He looked at the back of the hall, where the human civilians stood, scared but refusing to leave. He saw George Pratt, the old firefighter, who had moved without being asked, to stand in front of a group of Velhari children who had been brought to the palace for safety. George had positioned himself between the children and the door. He was not armed. He was not trained for combat. He was just an old man who had spent his life running toward danger to protect people he did not know. The High Sovereign stood. He raised one hand, and the hall went completely silent. "Recall the fleet," he said. All ships, full engagement. The next 4 hours were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Velhari defense fleet received the recall signal and began converging on Aethera at maximum speed. While they were en route, the Starpoint Carina maintained its electronic disruption, keeping the Draven fleet disoriented and unable to form a coordinated attack. Nate Bishop worked with Velhari tactical officers to bridge the gap between human and Velhari technology. Their systems were completely different, built on different principles, using different interfaces. But Nate was stubborn, and the Velhari officers were desperate, and together they created a makeshift data link that allowed the Carina to share targeting information with the incoming Velhari ships. It was clumsy. It was held together by improvisation and willpower. It worked. Dr. Greer sat in the Palace Communications Center, translating combat orders between human English and Velhari battle language in real time. Her voice never wavered, even when the palace shook from an orbital strike that cracked the crystal ceiling above her and sent shards raining down around her station. The Velhari defense fleet arrived in 3 waves, hitting the disoriented Draven ships from multiple directions. The Draven, still struggling to re-establish their communications, could not mount a unified defense. One by one, their cruisers were disabled or driven back. The carrier, the largest ship in the fleet, took a direct hit to its engine section and began to drift. 4 hours after it began, the Draven fleet retreated from the Aetheran system. They left behind 2 disabled cruisers and a trail of wreckage. They did not send a farewell message. They simply turned and ran. Inside the palace, Dorath Kale was arrested by his own guards. The council had voted unanimously to declare him a traitor. As he was led from the hall, he passed Danny and stopped. His white markings had gone dim. "You have changed nothing," he said quietly. "Emotions are still weakness. This will be proven in time." Danny looked at him. "Maybe. But today you lost to people who felt something. That has to mean something." Dorath Kale said nothing more. His guards took him away. In the days that followed, the High Sovereign addressed his people. He stood before the crystal screens that broadcast his image across all of Aethara, and he spoke words that no Velhari leader had spoken in living memory. He said that he had spent his life believing the Velhari way of silence and isolation was the only path to survival. He said that he had been wrong. He said that the humans had shown him and all of Aethara that feeling was not weakness, that trust was not foolishness, that opening your heart to another being, even a strange one from a strange and noisy world, was the bravest thing a civilization could do. He formally declared humanity a bonded ally of the Velhari people. It was the first such alliance in their entire recorded history. The 12 human civilians returned to Earth as quiet heroes. Chris Dunn went back to teaching in Montana. George Pratt went home to Virginia and placed a photograph from Aethara next to Helen's picture on his bedside table. Katie Marsh kept in touch with the Velhari healers through long-range messages. Sam Ortiz wrote a song about crystal trees, and it became the most downloaded track on Earth for 3 months. Nate Bishop was promoted. Dr. Greer published a paper on Velhari empathic linguistics that changed the field forever. Commander Hayward received a commendation she never talked about, and she quietly requested that Danny be permanently reassigned to the diplomatic corps. And on the last night, before the Starpoint Carina was scheduled to depart Aethara, Danny walked to the Crystal Grove one more time. Kalith was already there. She stood among the glowing trees, her violet markings bright and unguarded. Parts of the grove were scarred from the orbital bombardment. Crystals that had stood for thousands of years were cracked and dark. But the grove was still standing. The hum was still there, quieter now, but steady. Danny walked to her and stopped. The twin moons of Aethara hung low in the sky, casting the grove in soft, pale light. "I have to go back to Earth," he said. at least for a while. There are reports to file, and debriefs to sit through, and probably a lot of people who want to tell me everything I did wrong. Caliph looked at him. And after that, I was thinking I might come back, if you will have me. She tilted her head. The glow on her cheekbones brightened. You know that among my people, the sovereign is not something that expires. I know. And you know that I have never taken it back. I know that too. Caliph took a step closer. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, and her bioluminescent markings spread soft violet light across his fingers. It was strange and beautiful, and it felt more like home than anything Danny had ever known. Now stay, human, she said. Not a whisper this time, not a hope or a plea. A promise, spoken clearly, under open sky, with no masks and no fear. Danny looked at her, at the glowing grove, at the moons above a world that had learned to feel again, because a communications officer could not pronounce a greeting correctly. I am not going anywhere, he said, and he meant every word. She did not need to be an empath to know that. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could end a war and start a world. Then she pulled him closer, and the crystal trees hummed around them in the warm Aetheran night, and for the first time in a very long time, neither of them was alone. Danny Cole never wanted to be a diplomat. He was a communications officer, the kind of guy who fixed broken signal relays and made sure radio channels stayed clear during long space flights. He was good with machines. He was not good with people. But when the United Earth Coalition needed a last-minute replacement for their diplomatic team heading to the Velhari homeworld, Danny's name came up because he had taken 2 semesters of alien language studies back in training. That was it. 2 semesters and bad luck. The ship that carried him was called the Starpoint Carina. It was not a warship, and it was not fancy. It was a mid-size exploration vessel with a crew of 40 and a hull that groaned every time it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Danny shared the mission with 3 others on the liaison team. Commander Lisa Hayward was the team leader. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a voice that could stop a room cold. She had done 6 first-contact missions before this one, and she treated every alien encounter like a chess game, where one wrong move meant losing everything. Corporal Nate Bishop handled security. He was broad-shouldered, quick to laugh, and kept a small rubber ball in his pocket that he squeezed whenever he was nervous, which was often. Dr. Amy Greer was the xenolinguist. She had spent 12 years studying alien cultures and spoke pieces of 9 different alien languages. She was the one who had tried to teach Danny proper Velhari pronunciation during the 6-week journey to Athara. It had not gone well. The Velhari were known across the galaxy as one of the most closed-off species in existence. They were tall, nearly 7 feet on average, with silver-white skin that seemed to catch light even in dim rooms. Thin bioluminescent lines ran along their arms, necks, and faces, and these lines would glow faintly in different colors depending on what the Velhari was feeling, though most Velhari had trained themselves to suppress this glow in public. Showing emotion openly was considered deeply improper in their culture. It was seen as a loss of control, almost like undressing in front of strangers. They valued silence, composure, and careful speech above all things. Every word they spoke in formal settings was measured and deliberate. No species had ever secured a full alliance with them. The Velhari preferred to watch the galaxy from a distance, trading only when necessary and trusting no one. When the Starpoint Carina arrived in orbit above Athara, Danny looked out the viewport and felt his stomach tighten. The planet was beautiful in a cold, sharp way. Its surface was covered in vast forests of crystalline structures that caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into pale rainbows. The cities were built into and around these crystal formations, with towers that seemed to grow out of the ground like frozen trees. Everything was precise, Everything was clean. Everything looked like it would shatter if you touched it wrong. They were brought down to the surface in a Velhari shuttle, and escorted through the capital city to the High Sovereign's palace. The palace was the largest structure Danny had ever seen. Its walls were made of a deep blue crystal that hummed faintly when he stood close to it, as if the building itself was alive. Inside, the ceilings stretched so high that Danny could not see where they ended. Light filtered down from somewhere above in soft columns, and the air smelled faintly of something sweet, like cold flowers. The opening ceremony was held in the Great Hall. Hundreds of Velhari filled the tiered balconies that lined the walls, all of them silent, all of them watching. Danny stood with his team near the center of the floor, feeling very small and very human. Commander Hayward had briefed them 3 times on proper behavior. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make sudden movements. Do not smile too widely because the Velhari could interpret it as a threat display. Do not touch anyone. Do not compliment anyone directly because personal compliments were considered intimate and inappropriate in public. Danny repeated these rules in his head like a prayer. The ceremony began with a series of formal greetings. Velhari officials approached the human team one at a time, spoke a ritual phrase, and waited for the proper response. Dr. Greer had drilled Danny on the correct reply. It was a simple sentence in Velhari that meant it is an honor to stand before your gracious council. Danny had practiced them over 100 times. The first 3 officials came and went without incident. Danny spoke his line, they nodded, and they moved on. His confidence grew a little. Maybe this would be fine. Maybe he would get through this without ruining anything. Then his translation earpiece crackled and went dead. He tapped it once, twice, nothing. The small device had simply stopped working, probably a frequency conflict with the palace's crystal resonance. He looked at Dr. Greer in panic, but she was engaged with another official and did not see him. And then she was standing in front of him. She was different from the other Velhari he had seen. She was younger, for one, and while most of the officials wore heavy formal robes that covered them from neck to ankle, she wore something lighter, a flowing garment of pale silver that moved like water when she walked. Her skin was the same silver white as the others, but the bioluminescent lines along her cheekbones and the sides of her neck were a shade of deep violet that Danny had not seen on anyone else. Her eyes were the same violet, large and calm, and focused entirely on him. She spoke the ritual greeting. Danny's earpiece was dead. He could not hear the translation. But he knew the response. He had practiced it. He opened his mouth and spoke the 8 words in Velhari, pulling them from memory, trying to match the sounds Dr. Greer had drilled into him. But one sound slipped. One vowel shifted just slightly in the back of his throat. And in the Velhari language, where a single tonal change could alter the entire meaning of a sentence, that small slip turned, "It is an honor to stand before your gracious council," into something very, very different. What Danny actually said, in clean and almost perfect Velhari inflection, was, "You are the most gorgeous thing my eyes have touched." The hall went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your skin. Every Velhari in the room stopped moving. Danny saw Commander Hayward's face go white. He saw Nate Bishop's hand reach for the rubber ball in his pocket and squeeze it so hard his knuckles turned pale. Danny did not yet understand what he had said. He just knew that something had gone terribly wrong. But the Velhari woman in front of him did not step back. She did not signal her guards. She did not look offended or angry. Instead, something changed in her face, something subtle and quiet, like the first crack of dawn on a dark horizon. The violet lines along her cheekbones began to glow brighter. A soft, luminous blush spread across her silver skin, visible to everyone in the hall. In Velhari culture, this was the equivalent of shouting your feelings from a rooftop. She tilted her head slightly. Her violet eyes held Danny's, and in them he saw something he could not name: surprise, curiosity, and something warmer underneath. Then she leaned in close, so close he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin, and she whispered in near-perfect English, "Now stay, human." Danny's earpiece flickered back to life just in time to translate what he had said. His face went red. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Dr. Greer grabbed his arm from behind and pulled him back a step. "Do you have any idea what you just said?" she hissed. "I do now," Danny managed. "And do you know who that is?" Danny shook his head. "That is Calix Sorvon. She is the youngest daughter of the High Sovereign." Danny looked back at Caliph. She had not moved. She was still watching him with those violet eyes, and the glow on her skin had not faded. Behind her, on a raised throne at the far end of the hall, an older Velhari male sat motionless. His face showed nothing. His eyes showed everything. The High Sovereign had seen it all. And Danny Cole, communications officer, machine fixer, and accidental diplomat, realized that his life had just changed in a way that no amount of training could have prepared him for.